Hey guys, how you going? Welcome back to Foundations Podcast. Awesome to have you guys with us today. My name is Ben and I'm joined by Anna and Faith. I'm going to have an awesome time today talking about topics that pertain to leadership, and hopefully this podcast can help you in your leadership as you grow and serve God. For today's topic, we're going to talk about an interesting term called languishing. So we've titled it From Languishing to Flourishing. So I'm going to throw it over to Anna to perhaps explain to us what that actually means.
The reason we wanted to talk about this is Michael sent us an article that got us thinking. And many of us were not burnt out, we're not depressed, but we're not exactly thriving at the moment either. And so a term for that they've coined is languishing. And it's kind of that in-between kind of where you're not thriving in your mental health. You're doing okay, but you're a bit, you're just okay. And so we wanted to open up that topic and talk about it and talk about what that means for us and maybe open up some possibilities of what we can do about that.
Awesome. Well, how about we start? Where did this term come from? How did it come to us? Like you said, Michael Vandry, who's one of the leaders of CCVT, passed us an article, and I guess it caught our attention. So it'd be cool to ask where did it come from, who wrote it, who coined the term, I guess you could say, and also how that it's affected us and what things popped out to us as we were reading this material as well.
Adam Grant wrote an article in the New York Times, and he used that term languishing, which is particularly during COVID, I guess. It's that kind of phase that we're in where we can't do the things that we want to do necessarily. We're sort of caught in between. And so he's coined that term and it's become fairly popular. I think quite a few people are using that term now.
That's awesome. And so one of the things that sort of stood out to me while I was reading this languishing was firstly naming what languishing actually is. I think that was probably one of the biggest things that stood out to me, is actually giving a name to something that we're all experiencing, but no one's really quite been able to put like a name to it. And I guess it'd be cool, I guess for us, it'd be cool just to, Faith and Adam, just to see, as we're looking to how Adam Grant has named languishing, what things have popped out to us, and what have we seen in our own lives that may represent this term called languishing.
I think for me, one of the things I really noticed is that restless. You're sort of, I don't know, you've got that feeling you want to start doing things, you want to get some momentum going and things, but you kind of don't know if you can, and you kind of feel a bit stuck. And so you're kind of restless because you're not sure what you can do, what you can get started on, what's going to work, what's not going to work. So, I think for me, reading the article, I think, it's that sense of restlessness.
Yeah.
For me, it was just like, this makes so much sense. Even kind of like me thinking I'm doing the things I need to look after myself, but then, and so kind of putting up the question, but why am I feeling this way? And kind of not understanding, because I'm doing all the things that would normally help to maintain my mental health or ministry. But then I started to notice, procrastination, growing, or my discipline needing to be something that I've had to work at even more. Or, I love the term that the article said was revenge bedtime procrastination. And essentially they were saying it's described as staying up late at night to reclaim the freedom we've missed during the day. And I loved it so much because I thought it was true. But I think for me, just being like, it almost gave me a thing to think about, in the sense of what else. Is there something else that I can do in this space of languishing then? Because what I have normally done to help maintain my mental health is obviously starting to be affected. And so what does that look like?
Yeah, I think when you say the term mental health, and it's something that we can probably share this article as well, I think, in the description for this podcast. But one of the things that Adam Grant pointed out, which is something that I definitely thought in terms of, was when you talk about mental health, it's almost like a binary thing. It's like you're either mentally ill or doing really bad, you're not doing well, or you're flourishing. And there's a spectrum between doing really bad and having mental illness and real mental health challenges and problems to flourishing. And flourishing is the end where it's obviously positive and you're doing really well. You've got a sense of meaning, you got purpose, you got drive, you got motivation. And obviously depression and anxiety and mental health issues, like severe ones, are opposite to that. And so I think one of the things for me was that I guess I've been all the way through the spectrum. I guess you could say it through this podcast. This lockdown. I think one of the things that really helped me was that just because you're not doing really bad, or just because you're not on the lower end of the spectrum, doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing really well. And so one of the things that Adam Grant said, which I think is really important for leaders who are going through this thing, in lockdown, and managing people's emotions and managing, the fact that they've got to lead in probably one of the most hardest times for a church leader at the moment. They feel as though they've got to put a smiling face on, and if they're not doing incredibly bad, then they've got nothing to complain about. But Adam Grant says that actually the languishing is the neglected middle child of mental health, and it's almost like he's given the name to the little child that we kind of locked away in a room and didn't really want to see or try to ignore. I'm a parent of 2 kids, and I work in my bedroom, which is also my office. And one of the things I do is I lock my door to the bedroom, especially when I'm in meetings, and I can hear my children out the back banging on the door, and all I do is I just ignore it. I ignore as much as I can, hoping that if I ignore them for long enough, they'll just go and play with outside or play with toys and things. And I feel like that's what languishing is. It's like it's been knocking on our door. We haven't really wanted to recognize it. We haven't really want to give it a name and think that everything's okay. If we just ignore it, then everything's okay. But this languishing can lead to deeper things as well. And one of the things that I guess so freeing for me is that he's given it a name that we can instantly identify with and say, what, that is me. And some of the characteristics of languishing, like you just said, Faith, around procrastinate, that nighttime revenge bedtime procrastination is so true. That is so true. I've done that so many times this week. When I know I need to go to bed, it comes to about 10:30, and it's my greatest thinking time. The kids are in bed. I've had at least 1 or 2 hours by myself, and I feel like, what, I'll push it to 11:30. I'll push it to 12, and I'll always regret it the next day. But yeah, just to understand that that's actually my revenge to the time that was taken away from me or languishing during the day, which is really interesting. What other aspects with you guys do you feel as though languishing has taken form, I guess, from your day to day as you've been home and throughout these lockdowns?
I think it's partly that it's hard to keep the empathy for everyone as well when we're all feeling that restlessness or that irritability or that sense of procrastination. It's sometimes hard because we're feeling all of those things to then identify with others and relate to where they're at. And I think that's why there's so much lack of understanding almost of each other, because everyone's taken really different positions in this and feels quite differently about it. But if we're struggling a little bit, and I don't think it's even a recognised struggle necessarily, it's, as you're saying, Ben, it's that middle child that feels unnoticed. I think most of us probably haven't even realised that actually we are in this space. And I think then it's hard to keep that empathy for others and that love for others and keep that as a priority. I think it's easy to get impatient with each other and say, how come you can't see it this way or feel this way about it? How come?
Yeah.
And I think, just even to say, and I don't know if this will mean anything for anyone, but just even to say, it's also not, necessarily our fault that we are where we are. Like, I think, you know, even for me, I like to take responsibility for things and own things and then make things right, you know, and, you know, because, and we shared this in the last podcast, because of my own personal health, I am forced to look after myself more than what I normally would. And then, you know, even being in this space of languishing, or definitely feeling that at times throughout the lockdowns, and being like, how am I here? What have I done wrong? Like, am I not looking after myself because I swear I have been, you know, or feeling like I have to justify, maybe, I don't know, to whoever. But even just reading, you know, this article and just kind of understanding what it all means, and kind of like with this season that we are in, that we've been in for a very long time, not knowing, you know, when it was going to end, how things are going to look, the constant pivoting and all the rest of it. There was only so much that we could do with this constant unknown, if that makes sense. And so at least, you know, for me, or maybe someone else, and you are finding yourself in this place of languishing, I don't feel guilty about it. Like, I just feel like I had to say that, like, don't see this as something you failed at, or I've let my team down, or I'm going to let this person down, but just something that, you know, we all face from time to time, or we currently are. And now being able to put words to it, saying this actually makes so much sense, to be able to, I guess, have a sigh of relief in some ways, and saying, oh, it's not me, thank God, you know, but then looking at how can we actually get to this place of flourishing, which obviously God wants us to be in.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's helpful to identify languishing even by the words that we say, you know, like, you know, Adam Grant in his article pointed out the fact that the words like meh, that kind of thing, which I've heard so much with the people that I talk to, that's the language of languishing, I guess you could say. And when you ask people, you know, how are you going? They're like, oh, you're doing okay. And when people say that, we instantly assume, oh, they're doing fine, they're doing well, kind of thing. And there's an interesting thing that Adam Grant also said. I hope I'm saying his right name. Adam Grant also said was that there's this idea in America, because this is obviously an American guy and a psychologist, organizational psychologist. By the way, he didn't coin the term. He just wrote an article about it, just so we're accurate there. One of the things that he said that was really striking to me, and I guess in a lot of churches, was this thing in the American culture called toxic positivity, which means that you have to be doing really well all the time. Now, I think that term's really cool because it relates to church in the sense that there's almost like this, and I don't like using the word toxic, but almost like a version of faith where you have to put a smile on your face, otherwise you will not. I guess coined as someone who's lacking faith, and all you need is faith, and that kind of thing. And I guess it'd be cool to hear from you guys around how this term languishing actually releases people or takes them off the hook to force a smile, like when you're going into meetings or when you're catching up with people and they're saying, how are you going? Especially with people who maybe you're catching up with someone who is really going through some really hard mental illness or mental health problems, and you feel as though you're not quite there, so you haven't got the right to say that you're not doing awesome. And it's almost like, oh, well, you're privileged to not be going through what I'm going through, so you should feel grateful. But yeah, I'd like to hear from you guys around what your thoughts are around this unhelpful sense of you've got to be positive and you have to be, you know, have a smile on your face, and especially as a leader, a church leader as well.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that's not what the Bible reflects necessarily. Like, you look at Psalm, you look at Lamentations, it's so real and it's so honest, that full expression. And I don't know why we're uncomfortable with being able to express really how we're feeling. We don't need to download on people all of the time, but there are times when it's okay to be a bit more honest. And especially if we can't do it with God, then who can we do it with? We need to be able to say, I really am feeling this way. I don't understand why and all of those things, but this is how it is. And I think we've got to be able to be real and to be honest about that, because if you can't do that, you can't even recognize that you have a need for something else, or that you have a need for God and a dependence on God, because you're not really being real. You're faking it all the time. So part of it is, I think, God just wants us to be honest with where we're at, and to be able to be honest with each other and recognize our need for other people too.
And I think, like, maybe it's even like the, competing with our own expectations, or what we think the expectations of others have. Even I think I probably have to constantly remind myself at points, but I know I went through something quite hard a couple of weeks ago, and I was surprised by my response to it. And a few days later, I was kind of like, I feel like I feel bad for my response, or I feel like my response is not that of a leader, because, it affected me more than what I thought it should. And so that was definitely something that I had to then process and look at the reality of the situation and be like, oh, actually, this is a very fair response, and there is no expectation. But I definitely had my own expectations of thinking of what I should be. And so, having that weight to be okay was a massive thing. And then needing to work through that to drop and be real with God, and being like, actually, this affected me more than what I thought it would. Please help me through this, oh God.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that you said, Anna, just then was about not downloading on people when you're a leader. I think that's really important, because I think a lot of leaders feel as though they can't share because they feel like they're bleeding downwards, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term. Like, they're putting their problems on other people when they see themselves in a position where they're meant to help other people. It'd be good to maybe just have your thoughts on what can leaders do if they are languishing, and who can they speak to? Like, what's your experience been? What's the importance to be able to speak to someone, and who can they actually speak to?
I think it's really important to go to someone who's like your ministry supervisor or a mentor, or someone like that. That's a safe place, a close friend. So somewhere where it's safe to do that. I think it's also important that we sometimes share with our teams, but wait till you've worked it through a bit. So once you've processed it and worked it through with like mentor, supervisor, God, then I think it's sometimes important to be a little bit more transparent as leaders and say, hey, I was really struggling with this. But if you do it from a place of healing and you're open and transparent and authentic, I think that's really actually helpful to people on our teams and people that we're leading. But yeah, don't do it in the middle of it before you've processed it a bit more. But yeah, safe people, and we have to have them. Too often leaders say, I don't have anyone. Then go out and find them, because you absolutely need them. Otherwise, you will be unhealthy in the way that you lead.
Yeah. Do you think naming this thing, what we call languishing, has given people the opportunity to actually step out and be confident in going to see someone, even though they're not at the very end of the spectrum or down to the very bottom of the spectrum? Saying, like, how important is it for leaders to just recognize the fact that they don't have to be in the dark pit before they go see someone? Like, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, so important, Ben, because I think sometimes we wait till we're almost crippled by something before we open it up, and it's like almost too late then. It'd be far better if we were doing it regularly and along the journey before it becomes something so big, and it honestly can take a long time. And there's nothing wrong with seeing a counsellor or a psychologist and really unpacking stuff, but you're far better off doing it when it's small and along the way than waiting till you crash.
Yeah. And because there's that sense of, if you don't deal with it, you're allowing water to grow on those seeds, of like weeds, to using a term, the gardening terminology, I guess, but you're allowing that to actually grow and foster by not paying attention to it or just leaving it to the side. And so it's just, something that definitely needs, for your own benefit, not just the benefit of others, but for your own, to let it be something that you do, look into and not feel ashamed for or feel any guilt, but just know like it's totally part of life. And it doesn't mean something's wrong with you, but just that you went through something, or you've been through this extended period of lockdowns and COVID, that's of course going to affect anyone. And so, you can't stop some things from coming up. And so it's just being able to look into that straight away. And obviously there is that sense of being able to have a break, but then not letting that break be, 6 months or even a month really, but, doing something about it. And I think, Anna, you said a few times where, we're here for you as a team at Foundations, and we want to journey with you, and we can help you more at the start of your journey, when things are rough, than, we can when, you're at your wit's end and, you've burnt yourself out. And so, there's probably only so much we can do, because, there's a lot more of weeds to look at than there would have been at the start.
Yeah. I work with a lot of I just see a lot of a certain type of personalities in this pastoral role, and one of the type of personalities keeps on coming up: perfectionist kind of personalities, right? And I think there are a few people in this group that might.
If you guys, you'd see my hand raised if you were perfectionist.
And so, I guess one of the questions for me is, because you said something just before, Faith, which I think would be interesting to touch upon, is people who have a perfectionist kind of personality have very high expectations of themselves. Now, especially when you've got many things to do and many projects to run and many people to care for, you want to do it well, right? So, Faith, you are definitely one of those people that wants to do something well. I remember sending certain things to Faith, like little pictures, or I even did a signature, which was meant to go on a form. And she literally just wrote me back and laughed at my signature because it wasn't neat enough. Like, that's kind of what we're working with at the moment. So when you've got high expectations and people with a personality that they want to get things right, have high expectations, they put them on themselves. Now, when you're in an environment where it's really hard to get things going, accomplishing things, and there's just so much drama happening, how do you manage your own self-expectations this time? Especially when you feel like you're languishing, when you feel like that blah and meh, and I should be motivated, and I should have things happening, and we should be achieving things, and things should be better. It seems as though this is the worst environment to have really, really, really high expectations on yourself. And I might be wrong, so feel free to disagree with me. But how do you manage that for yourself, and with the expectations that other people have on you as a pastor as well?
I think it's definitely something that's, and even in this current season, going to God and letting him set me straight, all my expectations straight, and, just remembering what I'm actually called to do, and letting that continue to be the focus, and readdressing things and seeing, because, even with me being a perfectionist and me liking to do things well, I think there's certain things where I've definitely had to not have so much control over, which is a constant practice. But, just being really real with actually what God expects of me, which is to love God and love people first. And so, that's what I need to expect of myself, I guess, in that sense. And I think knowing what I have said yes to, what can I say no to, so that I can regroup and still give things, with the spirit of excellence, and not to push myself and run myself into ground. But obviously we still want to be able to do things in well in God's called us to steward what he's given us. And so that's obviously a really real thing as well, but definitely needing to go to God and falling at my knees at times and letting him set the expectations and letting go of what I think is the best way to do something. Or
yeah.
I think one of the things I found helpful too in what Adam Grant talked about was recognizing that we all need a sense of progress. And we can feel like we're not really getting much progress at the moment. So how do we set ourselves up for just small wins? Because that's what brings that joy and that level of satisfaction. And so finding things like, obviously we have to be realistic with our expectations at the moment, but just finding things like a little problem to solve, or a little thing to brainstorm, or a little thing that we can start working on and developing at the moment, just setting ourselves up for those small wins. I found that really helpful.
And I think Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot, in the sense of, because he goes, when you procrastinate, you're actually not accomplishing anything. And that time of procrastination is actually a time of sowing more weeds. And so he was saying, finding those small wins that you can do, or those small tasks that you can accomplish, actually helps with your spirits in wanting to achieve more and get up, because you're getting that sense of satisfaction. And you're seeing that you are doing some things, because, that to know that you've done something is a huge, sense of relief, and makes you feel good. And so he would go as far to say, like, making your bed is like one of the best things that you can do in the morning, because you've done one thing for the day and it sets you up for the rest of the time that, you are going to do. And so he really dislikes procrastination because of what you're actually doing with that time, in the sense of it's not accomplishing anything and you're watering weeds. And I really loved the way that he worded that, and just what you were saying, Anna. I think it's really important, particularly in this time, finding the wins. And in a ministry setting, it might not be that you're getting, the number of youth kids each week, but it's that youth kid that texts you back, and that's the win you need to take, not that, you're from 50, you're only getting 20, because, we all know Zoom sucks, at the moment. We're all tired of Zoom. And so we need to change the expectations, or seeing the small things, because that brings life.
Yeah. And I think for me, particularly, procrastination comes when I feel as though I have to take one big major leap to accomplish something. And so that fear of like, okay, I've got to psych myself up. Okay, I've got to do this. I've got to do that. Instead of having that perspective, it's almost like try to jump to the top of Mount Everest, because I've got all this work that I need to do and things that I've got to accomplish. But instead of doing that, setting small goals, and like what you're saying, setting small wins does something to me, which Adam Grant picks up, which is called getting into a state of flow, or flow state. And so flow state actually happens when you're in this weird little space where you're being pushed, and there's enough stress, called sous-stress, enough stress to get you think creatively and to get you going, but not too much stress, which is called distress, so that you start breaking down. And so it challenges you enough to get you in a state where it's flow, and that flow allows you to actually get rid of your self-examination and preoccupation, and starts getting you absorbed into something that you quite enjoy. And I think a lot of people have found this to be true. When you do something like drawing or dancing or going for a good bike, or even a conversation that's quite stimulating with someone, and you sort of lose your sense of self and you get really engrossed in it, and you look at the time, and it's almost like you were in this timeless state and things have gone by, and you pay attention to the feeling that you have after you're in a flow state, which means that, and the feelings that you'll see and you'll sort of recognize, is that you feel freer, you feel lighter, you feel as though there's a bit more hope, you feel as though you're a bit more motivated. And one of the things that I think is really important is we can get ourselves into a flow state pretty much every day, just by gauging where you're at. Where's that point that if you don't have enough stress, you become bored and you start becoming despondent? But where's that point that if you work too hard, you start breaking down and not feeling well? And try to stay in that level. And it changes for everyone. the further you go and the more you practice it, flow state changes. But to put a Christian perspective on it, where's that place the Holy Spirit's leading you that's challenging you a little bit, but you're not too afraid to go there at the moment? And I think sometimes when we talk about the Holy Spirit and God, and we think that it's either 100% full blown or absolutely nothing, I think he also leads you in progression as well as you grow and walk with him. So every single day, how are we prompted by the Spirit to do something? And I guarantee you, it doesn't always have to be a super spiritual thing. Like it might just be playing a word game on your phone or just taking some time out, watching something funny. Something that's really helped me, that flow state, was every single night, we've been watching Parks and Recreation on Netflix. Now, I'm not sure if you've seen that show. I don't even know what to think about it at first, but I love it. It's my favorite show ever because it's hilarious, right? And we actually watch it with our brother-in-law and sister-in-law over Messenger. So we have a Messenger thread open and we just type in things that are funny. We start at the same time according to the iPhone clock. But what that's done for me, it's actually given me something to look forward to most nights, not every night. And it's an activity that gets me to stop thinking about myself and start thinking about what's funny. It's something in common with someone else, with my wife and my brother and sister-in-law. And we get to chat about that stuff as well. And we joke around and all that kind of thing. I've found that to be so helpful for my overall health. And it's what I think Annie Brown's talking about is about the flow state. But there's also projects as well. Have you guys taken on any projects or anything like that over the lockdown?
Not really, but what I have really enjoyed is lots of exercise. Lot more exercise. I can get into a much more of a routine with it because we're not driving everywhere. So that's something I can do regularly, and that's something I've actually really enjoyed.
Yeah. I think probably two things. These guys will know, but I love Pokemon Go. Anyways, I might have just, derated myself slightly in some people's eyes, but it's a great game and it distracts me a lot and it gets me outside of the house, so that's been really good. And then I'm currently working on another podcast for something else, and that's actually been an extremely exciting project to work on, and so that's been really fun and filling for me. So
that's amazing. So maybe we can we'll try to tie it up pretty soon and the podcast. But what would be cool is let's just sort of name. So for those who are listening, just to name what languishing actually is. Well, firstly, the importance of naming it, and then just what the characteristics are, and then just a few things that we can suggest for you to help you in this time of languishing, and things that you can do as you sort of come back to church. So I'm going to put it out there. What do you guys reckon at the 1 or 2, 3 things that you feel as though for you is languishing? And we can go from there.
Awesome. I think for me, languishing was very much, something like, just to re-quote Adam Grant when he said, not depressed doesn't mean you're not struggling, not burnt out doesn't mean that you're not fired up. And I think for me that really resonated, just even with I was probably a couple of weeks ago in just trying to work out what does that mean for me to move past this place of languishing and actually getting to this state of flourishing. And so I guess what we were talking about before in trying to find those projects or those ones that I'm currently taking part in, to doing those things maybe more and letting those be a priority, maybe over the other stuff that used to feed me mentally that's not so much working as much as it is or as it was because of the season that we are in. And so for me, just being really real with that, being able to name it, but also making those projects a bigger priority or doing them more so that I can start to move more into flourishing and go into that flow state, which Adam talks about really well.
And I think for me with the languishing, I guess what I'm finding in myself is that impatience to get moving again and having everything going again. And so I guess it's just recognizing where we are at the moment and being okay with that, and recognizing, okay, maybe I'm not feeling like I'm flourishing, and to look at that and go, all right, what will help me to get back to that, and feeling like, I guess, because we don't have much control over a lot of things at the moment. And I never thought I was a controlling person until I had to teach my kids to drive. And then I've discovered that when you're driving with a learner driver, I definitely have tendencies to want to control things. And COVID, we just have not been able to. And so it's getting past that restlessness, maybe that level of, I don't know, kind of almost anxiety around, when's it going to open up again? And yet I wouldn't say I was anxious about it, but there's just that impatience and wanting it to happen. And so bringing it back to those small wins, what can we do? What can I really sow into and open up possibilities and enjoy developing that, and not being dependent on things opening up, or being able to do the things that we want to do, but finding the wins in what we can do.
Yeah, that's good. And I think for me, it's probably one of the first things I want to recognize is it's okay to name the fact that you are languishing. Like, to suppress those emotions or to hide them or to ignore them is not a healthy thing to do, I think. And so one of the things that for me was to actually be real and go, how is it that I'm actually going? I may not be at the very end of the spectrum on both sides, but it's actually okay to go, just because I'm not struggling heaps doesn't mean I'm not struggling at all. And so naming that is, I think it's really important, and bringing that to God as well. And one of the things that really helped me was the book of Psalms, and going through the book of Psalms and allowing the questions in the book of Psalms and the previous, the prayers that the psalmist gives to God to be my questions as well, and almost preempting things as well. That was super helpful for me too. And so, yeah. And then the other thing as well, I think, is don't stop pressing into relationships, even though you've been locked out. I think it's so easy to just back away and think that, you'll be okay if just give it a bit of time, and when we get back together, and when the government says that we can have relationships, then we can have relationships. God said from the very start, it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for us to isolate ourselves. Yes, for introverts, it may seem like heaven for a little bit, but I think it's really important just to keep pressing into relationships, keep pressing into, whether it's a call, Zoom call. I know everyone's over Zoom. I get it. Like, it's the worst, but I just noticed I feel so much better being able to be sharpened by someone, a good friend, having a good laugh, catching up with someone, even though it's for a walk. And yeah, I just encourage you as well to get stuck into the Word. Something about the Bible that just gives life. Can't put your finger on it. I don't know exactly scientifically how it works. Just when you refresh yourself with God's Word, we can't live on bread alone. We can't live on just eating well, and even though all this stuff's really good, but every single word that comes out of the mouth of God. So that'd just be my encouragement for those who feel like they're languishing, to get to a place where flourishing, it is possible. So
yeah, no, so good. And guys, we're about to finish up, but just to say too, is that, like, obviously we've been able to bring these learnings to you guys, which we have obviously learned from Adam Grant. So we'll definitely make the articles available for you guys to do reading of yourselves. But maybe you knowing this term, maybe for yourself or those around you, being aware that this is something that nearly every single person will be feeling, most likely, because of the season that we are in. And I think it's really important for us to obviously look after ourselves first, because we can't look after people if we're not looked after ourselves. But knowing that, when our congregations come back, after the restrictions ease and all the rest of it, how do we look after them when they're in this state of languishing, and how do we help them move from languishing to flourishing, whether that be, taking the time to have in-depth conversations with those who are languishing, because some people who express impatience about the slow pace of reopening may feel other things below the surface, and that very well could be languishing. And so, as we have extended grace to one another, let's make sure that we're doing that with our congregations and our people coming back as we reopen and the state of Victoria and Australia, opens up to the world. But we definitely hope this has blessed you guys. Please message us if you'd like to talk about this further. We're always interested in having conversations and journeying with one another. So it's been real. All right, bye guys.
Bye.
Bye.